Welcome, Samuel.
Welcome, thank you.
So I was inspired by this podcast by listening to your workshop during the regional day, and it was about your life before Pearson back in Guatemala. So would you provide an overview for the people that weren't there?
Okay, thank you, Bumi. Well, I'm happy to talk about my life previous to Pearson College. I wonder if I should focus just on my life, or maybe just more talking about the topic that we were talking and discussing about, the political problems that I saw and identified in Guatemala before coming here, and then how I understood it even more after coming here to Canada. So you tell me what would be the best thing.
I think providing a general idea of the political situation would be good, but more of like you as an inspirational figure at Pearson.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let me start with a couple of things. Maybe prior to coming to Pearson, I will try to put Pearson College as the turning point in my life. But it's interesting because the way I learned about Pearson College was when I was studying at the university. I was studying economics, and a really, really good friend of mine, he is a Pearson College alumni. So he graduated from Pearson, and then he went to study economics at the university, and that was the same university where I studied in Guatemala. And then we got really good friends. We became really good friends. We have lots of things in common, and I remember we were really passionate about economics at that point. We studied together. Actually, we talk about many issues that maybe some of our peers didn't really understand, or they weren't really interested. So that made us really good friends. And that's how I knew about Pearson College, because of this friend of mine. And I remember also being part of the student association. So at that time, Guatemala was still facing a dictatorship, or what we call the remainings of a dictatorship. So any social organization or student organization was seen as something that was a threat to the government or a threat to the regime at that time. But we were starting to live in democracy. So our generation started to see the transition between authoritarian governments and democratic governments. And we, with this friend of mine, actually Tomas is his name, we organized the student association, and we got elected. I was president of the student association at that time, and I remember doing some things that at that time were kind of not common to see, organized by students. Wow. So I think I feel so connected with students at Pearson College, because I feel you guys think the same way I used to think when I was a student at the university. And you want to make changes, you want to challenge the status quo, you want to raise your voice when something is unfair or unjust. You are conscious about environmental issues and social injustices. So I think youth is intrinsically full of those of that energy. And sometimes youth gets distracted, So that would be my first saying about before coming to Pearson, and how I got a little bit more involved with the movement, even without being part of the UWC movement formally. Yeah. So then afterwards, after many years, I graduated from, I'm an economist now. I work for the government in Guatemala. I work for the municipality actually in Guatemala, and then I work for the university. And when I was working at the university, I was teaching, and also I was part of the staff in the economics department at the faculty. And my friend Tomas, he was actually studying for his PhD. And he called me and he said, they are searching for a teacher at Pearson College. And I know you know about Pearson, and then maybe you want to apply. Because I think you will be a good fit there. So I applied, I came here to Pearson, and now I'm teaching here. And as you know, I've been here now teaching for 18 years at Pearson College. But I think that was a turning point in my life, because I can define my life before Pearson and after Pearson, and things that also I was doing while being here, trying to help my country, because I never wanted to get divorced of my reality back home. So,
And so how did you being part of the political party play a position into your life?
Good, thank you. When I was about 19 or 20 years old, more or less.
Yeah.
As I told you, at that time in Guatemala, the social movements and social organizations were not really there. There was a lack of social movements. And the few ones that started to emerge, for example, Boy Scouts, that was something that remained. I was not part of the Boy Scouts movement, but always appealed to me to be part of something that big, something greater than myself, and trying to do something for others, in that case, to learn and just give back. And what I saw was the only or the few opportunities that were for youth were to getting involved in or to be involved in a political party. So I remember I was just walking one day near the political party where I affiliated, and I said, because I want to do something, I just entered there. I remember at that time the mayor of the city was from that political party, and I really admire him because I saw changes being done. At that time I was not clear about ideologies, thinking about the right wing, left wing. I just wanted to do something for others. So that was my belief. And I just came into that political party, and they were really welcoming youth, and they welcomed me, and they said, we are meeting on Saturdays. If you want to just be part of this, just come this Saturday. So I started to come to the meetings, and I really felt welcome there. I felt that resonated with me because people were discussing about social issues and big issues about how to change the country. I have to say that the party is a conservative party. We may label them as a right-wing party. And again, I don't have anything against right or leftist wings, ideologies or spectrum. But at that time, I think that was what resonated with me.
Yeah.
And I got involved. I had a lot of training in politics. And I saw that not many things were happening in the youth movement there. So I proposed to do something about reforestation. I said, let's do something instead of just talking about issues. Let's do something more pragmatic. And then the whole group said, yes, let's do a reforestation project. We found trees, the donation of trees, and we found a place to plant the trees. So we actually made a big event one of those days, and we planted trees. We call it the Forest for Dignity. I think it was called the Forest for Dignity, or we tried to put a name on it. We planted about 100 trees in an urban area. They are still there. Many of them are still there. Now they are grown up, so I'm happy to see that actually after some years. But that actually made me to have a little more of a visible, impact in the party, because the press went there, and it was a big deal at that time, because youth movements were not really as big as now they are. So that helped me to be feeling even more involved in doing things. So I got involved in politics. Then I supported the president at that time, because the major run for president, we actually made a lot of work as youth. At that time, youth were seen, as just cheap labor. We did that. Without hesitation, we helped with, putting stickers on cars and this kind of stuff. And the president got elected. So that was a good also opportunity for me to start working at the government, because actually they called me and we founded the youth office. The presidential youth office was funded with our group. I was part of it, and then we did a lot of things for young people in Guatemala at that time. So that's when I met the president. I learned a lot about internal things of politics, how the government works. Even if we were not doing bigger impacts, the small impacts that we made allowed me to understand more about politics and about the situation in Guatemala. And that's how I got involved in politics at that time.
Wow, interesting. So you saw it as so let me understand. Guatemala, the political parties are the only way the youth are able to get those short courses and, all of...
At that time, that was and I'm talking about the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s. Those were the few sources of getting trained or getting involved in youth action. Now we have way more. Now if you go to Guatemala, environmentalists, and then social activists and LGBTQ and right wing, left wing, all this different spectrum of things that young people can get involved. Now we have more, but at that time it was very limited to just political parties, and few political parties, not all of them.
I think it's inspiring how you just saw that opportunity and grabbed it, you know, and you did more than all the other youth in the party were doing.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I think that idea of making changes is always in any, you know, young spirit or young soul. I wonder actually why you got involved in Pearson College, because that's another thing. How did you know about being part of this? And I think it's the same kind of source of trying to do something more. So I wonder, where did you find about being part of this movement, or you were actually involved in some youth movements before?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful topic to talk about another time. But I would love to focus on you today.
Thank you.
And what's more interesting for me was your realization, because eventually you went on to oppose the ideologies of the politics in Guatemala, and you realized the systemic structures. And, you know, I remember you talking about how you wrote articles and, you know, you almost like were revolutionary. And would you talk more about that change?
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's fair enough to say, because I sometimes consider myself sometimes steering the you know, the status quo, and that is kind of a revolutionary aspect of me, perhaps. When I was studying in Guatemala as a young, you know, very privileged person, I got private education thanks to my parents. But I understand now that in Guatemala there's a big, even before it was even more strong, there was a big movement trying to keep a certain group of people, which I would call an elite, away from understanding the realities of the country. So the way that we understood about history of Guatemala and what was going around us was really limited. And I will attribute that to the educational system that we have. And that educational system was a legacy of many years of dictatorship. So the curriculum at the schools were really limiting our knowledge as young generations about what's really the reality of Guatemala. And as I shared the other day in the workshop, the reality of Guatemala is really hard for the majority of people. Most of the indigenous people, we can say about 80% of the indigenous population, they live below the poverty line. So there's the majority of the indigenous population. And the few ones who don't, they may have had special opportunities that not an average person will have. So we have a system of privileges and injustices, very entrenched, that was the norm when I was growing up in Guatemala. So I was not aware of that because I was part of the privilege. So when you are part of that privilege, maybe you just want to ignore it. Maybe you don't even know what are the other sources of information that you should get to know your privilege. And also, breaking that privilege is another challenge, because of course, if you are benefiting from the privilege, who wants to be less than the privilege that the system is giving you? So by human nature, I try to justify it in that way. Human nature makes us to be always willing to have more, to be better. And if a system is already providing you that, you don't even challenge the system. So that's what I feel that made me to be part of the structure at some point in my life. And that was when I was part of that political party and when I was supporting that government, that I didn't even know in some ways that was reproducing, those injustices. I wouldn't talk bad about everything that government did, because I think the government did many other good things at that time. The president, that now he is deceased, he did some also, I would say, positive things for the country. But of course, critically seeing the whole thing, he also did some things that were not really the best thing for people. So at that time, I wasn't aware. I was studying at the university. I started to study at the university at the time. So I was studying economics. And studying economics allowed me to understand a little bit more, okay? Because it's not just about economics and making money, but economics and about what you have been learning here about many social issues and externalities and all these other things that we start to look at with different eyes.
And your friend from Pearson as well.
My friend from Pearson, he still was studying his doctorate, but we were, as you were saying, we were friends because of that, because we were more aware of those issues and we got connected. I think my consciousness about those issues started at home because my dad was a medical doctor and he was always, giving us more insights about the social struggles of many of his patients, and he had also this big heart because of being a doctor. I think that was given to me as a child. So then when I came to Pearson to work here at Pearson College, well, I also had another realization back home, because when you travel inside Guatemala, you see, people living in poverty, and that's the majority. You see lots of injustices, and you see lots of inequalities. And that's, I think, the most important thing, because that's evidence that no books are going to tell you, even if people want to hide the reality from, some elites. Yeah. So that's something that you start to think and question, why is this happening in my own country? Yeah. So then I'm going to just forward to when I came to Pearson College. Okay. And that was the year 2006. And here, I started to see my country with different eyes. At that time, I already was writing a column in the newspaper. The column was more, I would say, very boring. At this point, I can just even say that it was boring, because it was about keeping the status quo. So some things that I wrote were about, how to maintain your business in track, or how to start a new business. Some things that are okay, they're fine, but I was not really changing the mindset of no one, because you could read my column and say, okay, that's fine, let's change the page, let's turn the page. When I came here, I started to realize many other things that I didn't see when I was living in Guatemala. Things like, for example, if you start to question the structure of power in the country, you don't have spaces to actually question it publicly. Or at that time, it was very difficult to find how to challenge, publicly structures of power. Yeah. And I said, well, here in Canada, I felt that, it's a democratic country. People speak loudly against their government. People speak loudly about things without fear. Yeah. Back home, you would fear for your life if you do something like that. So I started to realize that living in I would say, a relatively more free country, a more open and democratic country, allowed me to understand many things that I didn't understand by living, even by studying Guatemala. Interesting. So I started to look at what I have learned in my studies about inequalities, about poverty, causes of poverty, about what I saw when I worked at the government, at the municipality, and at the university, and all of that. And I actually did some research. For example, my thesis was about education and income. And I actually found that even if you have the same education level, some people earn less money than others just because they are indigenous, for example, or just because being a woman. So that was something that actually struck me when I made that research. Yeah. But then I just left it there. Yeah. But then coming to Canada, I realized, well, here, women and men are still having inequalities, but less inequalities than the oppression that women have there, for example. Yeah. There's a lot of indigenous issues here in Canada that haven't been solved. And also learning about the oppression here allowed me to understand the oppression in Guatemala as well. Mm-hmm. So all those things allowed me to start writing about those issues in the newspaper space that I had. And that's when I started to become a little bit more revolutionary, as you're saying. That's when people got more involved in reading my articles. I remember many people writing by email to me and saying, wow, Samuel, this is something that I didn't know. You made my mindset change. So I have lots of emails and feedback of people reading the columns. At the point that many people were starting to refer to me as, someone that I was kind of challenging the status quo. I was kind of a reference for some people in some other columns. Wow. So that actually made me feel, okay, I'm doing something right, because that steering the status quo was, I think, something positive. Yeah. However, some people didn't like what I was writing. Yeah. Do you want me to keep talking, or do you want to ask questions? Because I can keep talking more.
I mean, how did you deal with the people that didn't like you?
Yeah. So, for example, because I grew up in that elite, I have friends, and they are still my friends, many of them,
Yeah.
even if they don't like what I write sometimes,
Yeah.
but then they say, yeah, you're right, what you're saying is true, even if it's affecting me because my status or my privileges are affected when I read that and some others are thinking. I don't want to create antagonism. That's not my purpose in writing the columns. I just want to raise awareness and try to find solutions. And there are many solutions, but then the solutions will come from people, not necessarily from me. But then again, one of the things is that, for example, the newspaper I used to write, I wrote a column about the mining industry having a lot of privileges and not really leaving many things in Guatemala that are really benefiting the Guatemalan people. And that article, the newspaper didn't want to publish that article. They told me, you know what, we don't have space for the next week. Maybe we can write something else. And I said, I'm gonna wait for the following week, but please publish this.
Yeah.
And then, even if they were hesitant, they published the article, because now we live in a democratic country, they shouldn't be censoring anything, but they publish it. But the next week they asked me, you know what, Samuel, this was your last article, we don't have more space for you.
Really?
So
Wow.
that actually created a big deal in many of the people who were actually my readers.
Yeah.
They actually publish one, kind of communication, however, they posted something by saying, we do not agree on Prensa Libre not allowing some writers, because it was not only me, it was also 5 other colleagues that were not actually allowed to write after that point. And there was kind of an uprising of some people that were not really happy with censorship, because that was censorship.
Yeah.
What I feel is that mining companies own or they pay a lot of money to newspapers.
Right.
And at that time I was writing in that newspaper, so maybe that was one of the reasons. So
Wow.
right now I don't think they kill a lot of people. They still kill people, indigenous people are killed, that's something to be worried. But it's risky to live in Guatemala and raise those issues, because I was censored, but I still live in Canada.
Yeah.
But I would expect something more than just the censorship to take place if I was living in Guatemala.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank God you're alive. Wow.
Thank you.
And so you teach economics at Pearson, but I feel like economics with you is a completely different course than the IB economics. I think you try to reach beyond what is there, like rich white guys and their theories. You always establish that this is very capitalist, that this is just a very Eurocentric perspective. And do you think your past kind of influenced how you teach economics, and what inspires you to teach economics this way?
Okay, thanks, Mumi. I just want to clarify that the way that I teach is more, I like to put more emphasis on what the books do not talk about. But I don't want to say that whatever the books are teaching is wrong, okay?
Right.
Just to clarify that, to put some balance here, because as an economist, I still believe that capitalism has many positive things, that we can fix capitalism. That's my belief. Sometimes I'm misunderstood because some people think that I would be against capitalism. I'm not necessarily against it. I think I'm against the problems that capitalism creates that are not solved. So I'm more in the belief that those problems can be solved without being against the system. Okay, so the system could be improved. That's what I think. Okay. And again, capitalism is a big word, because I would say not necessarily capitalism, but maybe some parts of capitalism is what I think is important to keep. So now that I said that, I can tell you that the way that I teach at Pearson is because I believe that the students that are here are special students. To be very honest, I think when I came here, I felt this is the best place to teach in the world, because the students who come here, they really want to learn. I have 18 students in one class coming from all over the world, but I believe these are the best students from their homes. That's why they were selected. They are the ones who sit in the front row in their, back home perhaps. They are the ones who ask lots of questions back home. They are the ones who challenge their teachers back home. And they are all here. So can you imagine, for a teacher, having that is kind of a precious thing. So I feel that I need to go beyond of what a book talks about, because the IB may have an agenda. The agenda is yes, maybe more status quo. The IB also has a little bit beyond that. I think the IB also trains us to be more critical thinkers.
Yeah.
But I want to go beyond because I have experienced many other things that are not in the books.
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes I talk about it. Again, you mentioned the white, all North American guys. I consider myself a white, now older Western person in Guatemala. So I'm a privileged person in Guatemala. I would be part of that, privileged system without even having the merit of having some privileges beyond the rest of the population in Guatemala, just because I was born with the characteristics that I was born. You know what I mean? So it was just luck to be born in Guatemala with the privileges that I was born. But then I come to Canada, I'm not part of the elite.
Yeah.
I'm now a minority. Even my accent will be working against me sometimes when I want to express something, because my people who may be discriminatory against non-English speakers will actually use that against me, for example, just because of my accent.
Yeah.
So I'm in a country that I could feel that I'm a little bit less than, maybe, no, not less, but I'm the majority, but I'm not part of the elite. In Guatemala, I would be part of the elite.
Yeah.
So when I say that, is because I have experienced the privileges of being part of an elite, and now I have also experienced not having those privileges when I came to Canada.
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes when I teach, I want my students to be aware that many of the contents that we have in economics, in economic history, is coming from a privileged class of people.
Yeah.
And they are male, straight perhaps, white, European, all of these, Christian, all of those privileges are concentrated in even the way that we study economics. So many of the theories are coming from that background. So I think, well, sometimes we don't even think about it, because if I was maybe a white, European, Christian, straight teacher, I would not even see that. I would say, oh, this is normal. Okay, Adam Smith is like me, so why not to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because not being that, sometimes I ask, well, if Adam Smith was thinking in a different way that I'm thinking, and we adopt Adam Smith's thoughts, why cannot we challenging those thoughts as indigenous communities do, women do, Latin or South American countries do, with a valid argument.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to bring here, because here we don't want to train or to, limit the understanding of what we learn beyond what is being taught to us. And I'm sure you understand it, because you know how diverse a classroom is.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if we're a homogeneous class and we have homogeneous learning and an homogeneous teaching and everything homogeneous? We don't really learn anything else. We're just repeating what has been taught over time. See, that's what I think.
That's beautiful. And one last question is that what message or what teaching/inspiration would you give to students of Pearson? Okay, thank you. I will tell you a couple of things. Sometimes we fear of challenging the status quo. Yeah. Sometimes we fear that, maybe I'm wrong by doing this. I would rather just shut up. Yeah. Okay, I would rather not say something, because I think then I would be ostracized or I would be criticized. Sometimes we have the fear of being maybe expelled of the school or expelled from where we are. Can you imagine those people who are migrants in the USA right now, just not having the papers? They live with fear. But they are not criminals. Many of them are working today. But they're going to be prosecuted just because of crossing the border without, some papers. So what I feel is that there are still many injustices in the world. Yeah. And if we feel that what we are doing is not harming others, other than just trying to find the truth and trying to find solutions to problems and trying to find justice, then we shouldn't fear. Yeah. Because whatever we are doing should be the right thing to do. If sometimes that even means breaking the status quo, breaking how things have been done in the past.
but we need to have a strong argument to say why my saying is better or my view is better than what is being right now.
Right.
I have to have a strong argument, because if it's just a belief, then we see lots of problems becoming just beliefs. Okay,
Yeah.
so I should be able to support strongly my argument by saying this is wrong.
Yeah.
So we should change it. But this is my argument.
Yeah.
And I have always, in my mind, Rosa Parks, for example,
Yeah.
sitting in front of the bus.
Yeah.
Or John Lennon singing a song that is revolutionary at this time.
Yeah.
Indigenous peoples standing up and saying, this is our right. Women. So all of that, I think, is inspiring for me when sometimes I feel, well, I shouldn't be doing this. No, I should do it. And then let's talk about consequences. And if the consequences are going to be against me, I'm still going to be dying at peace by saying I did the right thing. Okay, I did the right thing because I'm going to be alive only once. So sometimes it's difficult to do that, but you have to keep going. And that's when you become an inspiration for others, perhaps, or that's when you become maybe the voice that others would like someone to have, and then they will join you. Because if it's really something that needs to happen, then people will support you. If it's not, then you will realize that maybe you were the only voice, and you say, well, I tried, maybe I was wrong, but I was trying to try it using some arguments that are more objective than just my beliefs.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So I think for anyone who is listening now, I will say, let's try to not to betray our own convictions, as long as those convictions are towards fairness, towards justice, towards making a better world. That's what I would say. It doesn't matter if you are right-wing, left-wing thinker. It doesn't really matter as long as you're doing something greater for the well-being of you and others and the environment and maybe the next generations. I think that's the most important thing.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
You live only once. That's what.
Yes,
Wow.
that's important.
Thank you so much, Samuel.
Thank you, Rumi. I appreciate your interview. I really appreciate your interview.